Thank you very much, and good afternoon all. I hope everybody's nicely refreshed after that lunch, which I must say was absolutely gorgeous. I won't keep you too long. I just want to take you through the journey that Cork City Council has gone on when it comes to specifically climate adaptation, flooding and citizen engagement. So I'm not going to go through the slide in much detail because obviously we've had quite a lot of the background this morning on the policy and the science behind it. Obviously we're dealing with anthropogenic climate change. We're not here to talk about mitigation, but there are lots of different mitigation actions. But specifically when you talk about adaptation actions, there's lots of different types, but specific when it comes to flooding, you can see some of the examples up there. SUDS, sustainable urban drainage, natural water management, flood protection works, including natural flood management. But equally, and I think it's a point that others made, and I'll make it again throughout my presentation, this has got to be a multifaceted approach. It can't be just around a flood management project. All projects we deliver have to have multiple deliverables, including, for example, biodiversity, better afforestation for carbon sequestration, etc., and also nature-based solutions. So there are lots of different impacts of climate on citizens and businesses across the country. Some of the non-water ones would include air quality, agriculture and food production, which we'll hear about later, droughts, which we heard about earlier, wildfires caused by dry spells, etc. But if I just focus on flooding in Cork City and some of the impacts in recent years, and there has been a dramatic increase in the quantum and the frequency of flooding in Cork. So if you go back to pluvial flooding in Cork, cloudbursts as they're called, back in October 2022, we had a very, very significant event across Cork, whereby upwards of a dozen areas suffered cloudbursts at the same time. We had a Munster final on Páirc Uí Chaoimh at the time with 30,000 people inside in the stadium, and the whole area outside the stadium was flooded. We had the South City Ring Road, which is a major artery around the city, the N40, completely and utterly blocked with tailbacks from the tunnel back as far as Ballincollig. In addition to that, I was over in Ballyphehane, engaged with some of the local residents who were experiencing flooding. And they were living in houses that were built by the City Council in 1950, and they had never seen flooding outside of their front door. And I was standing in 8 inches of water. So this is the impact that cloudbursts and increased rainfall that has been predicted, as we saw this morning, can have on a city like Cork. If we take a look at fluvial flooding from rivers is another big impact. And as recently as February 2021, we had 3.5 days where the entire west of the city was cut off from the east of the city. So the straight road in Cork and the Model Farm Road, for any of you who know Cork, are the two key roads linking Ballincollig with the city. For 3.5 days, they were underwater and completely closed. That had a massive impact on people being able to get to work, to get to school, to transact business. So, these do have a direct impact on people. And again, the last one there, tidal flooding or coastal flooding, as was referred to earlier. Back in October 2023, the Jazz Festival, Bank Holiday Weekend in Cork, I don't know if anybody visited. If you haven't, please do. It's a fabulous weekend. We had 100,000 people visited Cork that weekend for the Jazz Festival. And for 7 tides in a row, for 3.5 days, we had flooding in the city. And the images there on the left are 2 of the images taken from that specific event. The top one is Morrison's Island, and the bottom one is South Mall. And we had a situation whereby at 6 o'clock, the city was fully open, there wasn't a drop of water on the roads. 2 hours later at high tide, people were trying to get out of pubs and restaurants and nightclubs, and there was 6 to 8 inches of water outside the front door. They were stuck where they were. So these are the types of impacts that flooding has on cities. So what are the types of challenges that we face? I think you've got societal resistance to change. I think, as was mentioned earlier, individuals probably are making an effort, but as a society as a whole, there doesn't seem to be the drive towards making the changes that are required. There's also the perceived or real sense of loss. People don't like change, and invariably, unless there is significant engagement with them, they see change invariably will lead to a loss for them. And that obviously is another barrier to change. We've had a discussion, the last 2 points on this I'd like to just talk from this slide are around finances. We had mentioned a number of times with the Governor of the Central Bank in this morning, and he was talking about one element of the finances. But the amount of money that's going to be required to pay for the adaptation measures that are required is enormous. And where is that going to come from? Who is going to fund that? And finally, it was also mentioned earlier, knowledge gaps. We don't know everything we need to know, but that should not be a barrier to change. Perfection should not be the enemy of good. We need to move forward, even if we don't have all the answers. And again, it was mentioned by Conor earlier, if we don't get it right, go back and do it again. But we can't just wait and wait and wait until we have all the answers before we move forward. I suppose moving from maybe the negative maybe to the positive, what are the opportunities that are out there? And I think there's a lot of really, really good things out there. You take a look at the concept of the 10-minute city, or the 15-minute cities, or the 10-minute town, trying to locate all of the services, whether they be social services, recreational services, health services, all within a 10-15 minute radius of where somebody lives. So they'll work, live and recreate without having the need to travel long distances. While not directly related to flooding, which is the topic of my conversation, there are other improvements, and this is my point. A lot of the improvements that we're making will improve not only the flooding situation or climate situations, but also things like active travel improves health outcomes. Less congestion through public transport improves air quality. So there are multiple benefits from all the various different projects that will be undertaken. So what can we do different going forward? I suppose I've got 2 or 3 suggestions here. The first one, as I mentioned, is around an integrated approach. When promoting a climate change project, being honest with you, it probably shouldn't be promoted as a climate change project. It should be promoted as a health benefit project, or as a biodiversity project, rather than necessarily a climate change project. Sometimes climate change projects can have a negative connotation associated with them. If you bring a number of different interventions together, it can be a lot easier to get buy-in to that particular project. The next one is around public engagement. And I think historically, there has been significant challenges with public engagement. And I'd like to use the examples of the 2 images I have on the screen behind me. The top left-hand one is, sorry, the top right-hand one from your side is a typical engineering type architectural drawing that you would normally see published when there is a project being promoted. If I stopped 100 people on Patrick Street in Cork City and asked them to tell me what that means, probably 98 of them wouldn't have a clue, couldn't understand what that means. The bottom image is a 3D montage created of the exact same drawing above. If I stopped 100 people on Patrick Street in Cork and asked them, can they understand that? They most certainly can, every single one of them. So it's important when undertaking public consultation that we make the documentation as accessible as possible so as the maximum number of people can engage with it. And again, there was comments from earlier speakers about public engagement being critical. And the only way you're going to do that is engage with people in a means that they can understand, not using the acronyms that the Governor mentioned and technical jargon that people don't understand. It's engaging with people in a way that they can engage back with you. Also, I think there's the scale and pace of change was mentioned earlier. Right? We can't wait for the big bang solution, but I 100% agree with the Governor that offshore wind generation from an electricity perspective can be a game changer going forward. We can't just sit around and wait and say that's the only thing we're going to do. We need to continue to develop change and incremental change, which I'll come back to. So, some examples of what we've been doing in Cork City maybe along these lines, and I'll come back to the Docklands generation. I have 2 or 3 slides to go through some of that, how we have integrated flood management into this new Docklands plan we have for the South Docks in Cork City that will have 30,000 people living there and 20,000 people working there over the next 20 to 30 years. But I suppose, going back to my theme of having multiple benefits from individual projects, people are asking, what has Safe Routes to Schools got to do with flood management? Well, an awful lot actually. Because you can integrate things like, simple thing, a rain garden into your Safe Route to School project, which will help the surface water management in that area. It's small scale, but it's helping in that location. Bus Connects, which is redesigning the entire bus network in Cork City. There's huge civil works going to be required to undertake that work. And again, that is a much larger scale intervention that can include an awful lot of natural flood management within the delivery of that particular project. If I move on then to Cork City Council's City Development Plan, we have a green and blue infrastructure as part of that particular plan. And this is an interesting slide. There's probably too much of me to go through in detail, but you'll get a copy of the presentation. You can go through it then. This shows our vision for an integrated land use going forward in Cork City, where everything is integrated together. You're not just looking at the built environment. You're not just looking at the natural environment as two separate ecosystems. You're looking at them together as one ecosystem that you're managing and planning as one. I promised some slides on the Docklands regeneration, and I think this is a very, very interesting concept. If you take a look at the black arrows that are running from, as we see it here, from west to east, these show the water flow through the Docklands. We will be building some significant bioswales to get the water from the surface area into the bioswales and down through into the river, which is the black line, into the Atlantic Pond and out into the River Lee. So this is how we're going to manage the surface water within the Docklands. But we have a problem. If there is a cloudburst event, that drainage system is going to become overwhelmed. So we've planned for that at this point in time. And we have built, which is the area circled in yellow, what we call Marina Park. And this was designed from the very, very start as a dual-purpose park, whereby 99% of the time it acts as a public recreational facility, whereas when required, it actually has 65,000 cubic metres of water storage, which will attenuate a flood situation in the Docklands going forward once it's built. So what you'll see there is the area that's just highlighted in blue is higher level. It's between 1 and 2 metres higher than the rest of the areas. You can see from the red arrows the water comes out of the rivers, floods the yellow areas, goes under a culvert under one of our path areas and floods a back area. So this then provides significant flood storage during a pluvial cloudburst type event. So just to zoom in and show you some of the details, you can see on the top left, you have, that's the river and the water comes out both sides of that. On the top right, you can see how we have stepped the path areas 1 to 1.5 metres higher than the green areas, giving you the storage capacity. The bottom left is just looking at that image from the other side of the river, showing the floodplain, as it were, as it floods across. And the bottom right shows you the culvert that the water will flow under to allow it to flow underneath and fill the entire area as we've designed. My time's coming close to an end, so I just want to finish up with maybe some key takeaways. And I suppose I was heartened to hear that a lot of what I've got here was actually reflected in some of the comments earlier. And I swear we didn't actually collaborate beforehand and agree what we were going to say. But if you take a look, there's a huge challenge for awareness building across all of the 5 million people living in this country. It's not just one or two need to take actions. Everybody needs to understand that they have a role to play in this. And also, I think there's a significant deficit in public knowledge. Again, going back to that famous 100 people I'm stopping on Patrick Street, and if I asked them if burning fossil fuels is causing climate change and causing sea level rise, they'd all say yes. If I asked them and said, does the food you buy add to climate change? Most of them would say no. But I challenge them and say, it's the middle of winter in Ireland, you go into your local shop and you buy strawberries. Where do you think they came from? They most certainly weren't grown in Ireland. I challenge anybody during the winter, have a look at the box, you'll find they're grown in places like Egypt. Can you imagine the carbon footprint of getting strawberries, fresh fruit from Egypt to Ireland, just so that we can all have a punnet of strawberries in the middle of winter? So people need to understand the decisions they make on a daily basis have a significant impact. As I mentioned earlier, everyone needs to understand they need to do something. It can't just wait for the big bang interventions. We all need to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we recreate now. And not in 5 years or 10 years, we need to do it now. The pace of change is also important, right? We can't lose people as we move forward, right? The pace needs to be rapid. We need to push the pace. But if we go too fast and we lose people, that's as bad almost as nearly as doing nothing, because the end result is nothing happens. So we need to bring people with us, but we do need to push the pace. And I think as well, from my perspective, one of the key things is the cart before the horse scenario. We need to ensure that when we're getting people to make the change, and the point was made earlier, people will only make the change if they see they can make the change and there's perhaps a benefit for them in making that change. There's no point in telling people they need to do something differently if the different isn't already in place. You need to have in place what the alternative is before you ask people to take it. I think I'm just about on time. Thank you very, very much.